Now we would move on to scenario C, and the situation in scenario C is given by how many units has the government spending to change in order to obtain the same level of income as calculated in the basic scenario. Calculate the value of budget deficit and the component of demand. Show the change in income structure in comparison to scenario A by adding an extra column to the given table. So here what is asked is by how many units the government spending would change in order to obtain the same level of income, or income is equal to 60. So this we have already seen in the first part of our problem number 6. The level of income change when there is 1 unit of government expenditure change is represented by the formula dy over dg, and that we can apply by inserting the already identified formula, which was 1 over 1 minus C1. This we have already derived in problem 6.1, and our government expenditure multiplier is given by the formula 1 over 1 minus C1. Here our C1 is defined to be 0.8, so 1 minus 0.8, which would be 1 divided by 0.2, and it gives us a value of 5. So this is to say dy over dg is equal to 5. But the question says by how much units has the government spending to change in order to obtain the same level of income. So income in the initial period was 600, it decreased to 400, so the change in income was 200. We would really want to increase the income from 400 to 600, so this is again to say our dy is a positive 200 monetary value. So if I define this positive 200 in our formula, which stays here, it would give me like 200 divided by dg is equal to 5. If I multiply both sides by dg, I would have 200 is equal to 5 multiplied by dg. And then if I divide both sides by 5, I would have 40 is equal to dg. So in our case, government spending must be increased by 40 monetary units, that is to say our dg is positive 40, in order to increase income by 200 units. So the government spending multiplier or the government expenditure multiplier is 5. So 5 multiplied by 40 would give us 200, and this will lead to the same level of income as given in the scenario A. The second part or the second item in this scenario C is to calculate the budget deficit. And the budget deficit, as we have seen earlier, is calculated by G minus T. And now we have said that government expenditure should have been increased or should be increased by 40 units. So our government expenditure in the basic scenario was 100, but we are demanding that the government expenditure increases by 40 units. So this is to say, from scenario B, we had a government expenditure of 100, but in order to keep the level of income to 600, we have to add 40 to the government expenditure, which we secured from the government expenditure multiplier. Our tax remains constant or remains 100, so we would have a new budget deficit of 140 minus 100, which would give us an amount of 40. Furthermore, our consumption would also be impacted by this. So consumption is CO plus C1 y minus T, and we had autonomous consumption 10. Our marginal propensity to consume didn't change. Our income changed from 400 to 600. Our tax remained 100. So if I do my calculation here, I would reach a value of 410 for consumption in our new scenario C. Again, I will revert back to the table and I would fill the scenario C when government expenditure is increasing. Our income would be 600. Our consumption would be 410. Our investment didn't change, it would be 50. And government expenditure is now 140 units. And what would be the budget deficit? 140 minus 100, it would be 40 monetary units. Impact of government expenditure on income. Now we want to see the impact of change in tax on income. Basically, we have seen in the first part of this video, the tax multiplier would give us a good picture of by how much income would change if our tax changed by 1 unit. So this is to say, in scenario D, we are asked to calculate dy over dt, which we have already identified to be minus C1 over 1 minus C1. So if I calculate this one, I would have 0.8 as marginal propensity to consume, 1 minus 0.8 in the denominator, and this would still remain minus, and the final value that I would get would be minus 4. Here again, we want to have an income which is equal to the basic scenario, so we want to have the change in income to be a positive 200 money units. If I insert my 200 money units in the formula that I have just derived, 200 divided by the change in tax is equal to minus 4. If I multiply both sides by change in tax, I would have 200 is equal to minus 4 multiplied by change in tax. If I divide both sides by minus 4, I would have minus 50 here, and I would have here the change in tax amount. So in order to keep our income at a level of 600 monetary units, tax must be decreased by 50 units. And this is again a negative relationship between income and tax because we have minus 50 units. The budget deficit in our case would be again government expenditure minus taxes. And we have seen that there was no change in government expenditure, which was already 100, but our taxes had to increase by 50 monetary units, so it was 100 previously. We would deduct 50 monetary units from our taxes. And finally, the government budget deficit would be 50 units. our consumption would be autonomous consumption plus propensity to consume multiplied by disposable income, and this would be multiplied by 600 minus our tax amount was 100 previously, but now it decreased to 50. So we would calculate it this way, which would finally give us a consumption amount of 450. Again, we would revert to our table when taxes decrease, scenario D. Our income would be 600. Our consumption would be 450 as we just calculated. Investment remained 50 all the time. Government expenditure was 100, but our budget deficit is 100 minus tax 50, which is 50. So, as you can see from scenario C and D, we can actually make a comparison in the income structure, which is represented by the last column in our table. In scenario C, where we had the government expenditure increase, our consumption decreased. From the basic scenario, our investment remained constant and our government expenditure increased. However, in scenario D, when we had a decrease in tax, our consumption remained constant because it was 450 in the basic scenario, and it remained to be 450. Our investment remained also constant, and our government expenditure remained constant. The final exercise in this session is comparison of the instruments. What are the advantages and disadvantages of tax and government spending when they are both changing? For that, we have this table as a solution. The first scenario, or scenario C, was increase of government spending, and the basic advantage that we can see is like the smaller budget deficit that is secured from the increased government expenditure. But the disadvantage here is like structure of income change, higher government share and lower consumption share. When we have a decrease of taxes, the structure of income remained constant, which is an advantage for us, and the disadvantage is a bigger government deficit because our government deficit increased from 40 to 50, or from 0 in a basic scenario to 50 in scenario D. We can see the table that we have been developing so far. We can see that in scenario C, there is a lower budget deficit in compared to scenario D. The smaller budget deficit as an advantage is reported for the government expenditure increase. However, for the decrease in tax, we can see that there is a 50 monetary unit of budget deficit, so that is reported as a disadvantage in our case. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, please feel free to send us an email.